Lea Zemmour finds her purpose in life serving others through original hot yoga and mental health care. As a nurse practitioner and professor at the University of Texas in Austin, she specializes in psychiatry and mental health. Originally from France, Lea started practicing yoga at the age of 15, attended Bikram Yoga's teacher training in 2012 at the age of 23, and taught full-time in California for many years before finding her place in Austin, Texas. She feels a sense of responsibility to integrate modern medicine and pharmacology with the preventive aspects of original hot yoga. Her heroes are David Goggins and Arnold Schwarzenegger, among others. In this series of Pure Yoga Talks, we explore how many of the OG Bikram Yoga teachers have learned, evolved, and grown over the decades. Where are they, and how has their hot yoga practice and teaching evolved? Today, I have the pleasure of speaking with Lea Zemmour. Hello, Lea.
Hi, Jeff. Thank you so much for having me today.
I'm so happy to have you on this podcast.
Thank you.
All right. This is great for our audience, great for our students, great for the whole world out there to hear from you, and especially your special journey through yoga.
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
All right. Let's start with David Goggins. Why, wow, David Goggins? Tell us more.
I know it can sound a little bit perplexing for a petite French woman to admire someone like David Goggins, who is a retired Navy SEAL, an elite athlete. But I found in him something very inspiring that has resonated with the Bikram practice, with the 26 and 2, in the sense that he's someone who never gives up. He's always trying to improve himself, and he has this concept of being never finished. So there is always the next class, there is always the next posture, and I found him very inspiring, and I remind his voice resonates in my mind when I practice the Bikram series, especially when things get challenging. For example, he has that concept, the 40% rule, which I found very applicable in the Bikram series. So basically the idea is that it's not scientifically proven, it's something that he has experienced himself, is that when you think that you are at your maximum exertion physically, mentally, you want to come out of the posture, you feel like you're completely done, then you actually only have 40% of what you can do. So when I'm in standing bow pulling pose, and now I have the baby, so things are way more difficult, I remind myself, oh, you only had 40%. So it helps me to stay in the posture. It gives me a little bit more accountability to know that I can always do a little bit more than what my mind thinks that I can do. So David Goggins inspired me to work harder, to push myself a little bit more in the practice of the series. He also has this idea that you always want to go outside of your comfort zone, and that's the reason why I still practice this series after so many years. I started when I was 19, is because the Bikram series never fails to bring you in that zone where you get confronted with something that is very difficult. You will never have an easy yoga class. At least I never had an easy Bikram yoga class. And I go back to this practice because I know that it's the only thing consistently that is going to push me outside of my comfort zone. Mm-hmm. I'm also a fan of the author Ryan Holiday he wrote many books, but one of them, it's called The Obstacle is the Way. It's actually a sentence from the Stoic philosopher Marcus Aurelius. And the sentence...
Gladiator.
Yes, exactly. And the sentence go, the obstacle is the path becomes the obstacle in the path becomes the path. Never forget, within every obstacle is an opportunity to improve our condition. So again, we have this idea of always improving yourself, and I found that the series, the 26 and 2, always pushes me to go in that zones when I have to push myself, when there's nothing granted. I never know if I'm going to finish the class. There's always a challenge, and I found that very, very interesting and pushing me.
You know, the original hot yoga class, as it's known now, the old school Bikram yoga style, it was infamous for drill sergeants.
Yes,
Teachers.
very
For
much so.
drill sergeants, they wouldn't let you leave the room. You couldn't drink water until they told you that you could drink the water. There was oppressive heat, stifling humidity. There was bright lights in the yoga room, mirrors on the wall, and a stinky, wet, gross carpet. And all of these things were obstacles.
Yeah.
Many people who would come in for class and object to that would say, that's not yoga. Right? And we're giving them an obstacle, yet another obstacle to confront and to overcome.
Yes.
That was a big part of that culture 10, 15, 20 years ago.
Absolutely.
Right?
Yeah.
And you look back on that now, and yeah, David Goggins, Ryan Holiday, yeah, just more obstacles. That's the path. You know, part of the path, and people are like looking for the way, is to put more obstacles in your way.
Yeah. Yeah, and I think it fits well with the next concept that resonates with me from David Goggins. It's developing a callous mind. So the same way you have callus in your hands from pumping iron and going to the gym, you have the same thing occurring in your mind when you actually reach that zone, when you feel like you can't, or that you want, or that you are tired and you just want to leave the room and never come back, that you actually stay. And I'm very interested when I work with the students to find that moment when they are about to give up. And it's our role, it's our job to encourage them with kindness, compassion, to show them that they can do more. They can stay in the room, they can do one more posture, they can stay in the posture 5 more seconds, and developing that strength, determination of the mind.
That callous mind, I like that. Is like calluses on the fingers, calluses in the mind. It's resilience, building resilience.
Yeah. Resilience, perseveration, those qualities that I think Bikram was conveying to us in the early years.
That makes sense.
Yeah.
Now, let's move on. Arnold Schwarzenegger, you mentioned,
Yes.
to me was a big inspiration. So tell me about Arnold.
Yeah, so Arnold, he's a fellow European. He's from Austria, and he made his way to the United States, and he pursued his American dream. So I am inspired by his journey, which is incredible. I mean, he was the best at pretty much everything he did. So he's someone who always thrived for excellence. I like the fact that he started with bodybuilding, which can seem very narcissistic. You just spend hours in front of the mirror at the gym pumping iron and feeling the pump. But I found that he found a way to be useful to other people. He used his passion for bodybuilding and then making movies, and then eventually became governor of California. And under Bush, he was also part of one of the council to promote physical health and wellness to America. So he had a big impact in America. And I really identify with his work ethic and his willingness to work hard to pursue the American dream. I found that he's not only he's a very proud American, and I do too. I became a citizen in 2018, and I took very seriously my citizenship, and I feel like America welcomed me with open arms and showed me that if I want to work hard and achieve my dream, it was something that was possible. And I look up to him because he has done incredible things in his life. During the pandemic, he was very supportive of spreading awareness about the vaccination. He also passed some law about the environment when he was in California. So I think that he has done wonderful things for humanity. And as I'm about to become a mother myself, I'm asking in which world I want my daughter to be raised, and how, at my very small measure, I'm not comparing myself to Arnold Schwarzenegger, but how I can also help humanity and do my part in this world and in America, most specifically.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, that's great. So our Bikram yoga practice experience, you can mirror that of Arnold's bodybuilding experience.
Yeah.
It's a beginning way in.
Yes.
To finding your life purpose. And if your life purpose is to make an impact and improve the lives of others, that's what you're doing.
Yeah.
Right? That's a great goal, great purpose to be.
Arnold just released next book. It's called Be Useful, The 7 Tools for Life, I think. It's a great book. Be useful was always something his father used to tell him. No matter what you do, be useful. And in that book, he talks about using the mirror. That can be done in different ways. I don't remember, but in the early days, we used to be called, the Bikram yogi is narcissistic because we will practice in front of the mirror. And David Goggins also has that concept of the accountability mirror, is that when you practice for 90 or for 60 minutes in front of the mirror, there's no way out. You see exactly where you are, and it doesn't necessarily match where you want to be, but it's a very good reality check and a starting point to where you go from there.
Interesting. A lot of the quotes and lessons that we learned in our teacher trainings over those many years ago, they resonate, and even people like David Goggins and Arnold Schwarzenegger are saying very similar things.
Yeah, absolutely.
So they become almost universal truths at some point.
I think so. Yeah.
Okay. All right, let's move on. Let's move on to your yoga path. I always love to talk about and ask each person I interview on this podcast what brought them to yoga. I like to rewind early on in their younger days. First and foremost, let's start with your first Bikram yoga, original hot yoga class, 26 and 2.
Yes.
You're at the age of 19.
Yeah.
Now, who was your first teacher?
My first teacher, her name is Marine Auchin. She is the owner of both Bikram Studio in Paris. She went to training with Bikram, I think, in the very early 2000, maybe 2000. And then she opened one of the first Bikram studio in Europe. So it was a big deal. People had no idea what it was. I remember she will tell me stories, people calling the studio and asking what type of cult are you, and being very suspicious of what we are doing. But now, 23 years later, she still has 2 studios that are thriving, and she recently added the IHP, but it's only 90 minutes, so she kept it real. She kept it very original. And I loved my first class.
Wow. Yeah, you're right. Bikram yoga really, really took off in the 2000s, right? The turn of the century. It was sprinkled around before that, but right around 2000, 2001, that's where it really started to tip and explode. And throughout the United States, and then the West, we quote West, including France, and really worldwide. So now, you take your first class, and then what made you come back?
Yeah, I kept coming back. I did the 2 weeks intro, and I felt so good mentally. I had a tendency to feel depressed, anxious, and the more I was coming back to the studio, the lighter I felt. All of those dark thoughts, the negativity just kind of went away as soon as I would leave the studio. So I thought there is something to it, and I kept coming back. And very quickly, I think during my first class, I knew that I was going to practice this yoga forever. I remember us being in Padahastasana, hands to feet pose, and I was thinking to myself, this is the best thing ever. I'm never going to stop doing that practice. So pretty early on. And I kept coming back. I did want to go to training at age 19, which was not a good thing. So my dad told me, well, you have to finish college first, which I did. And I graduated from college with a master's degree in French literature in Paris in June of 2012. And I was in LA in September. So I didn't take too much longer to go to training.
That's pretty amazing, because you already said, I'm making up my mind. You were very decisive. That's what I said earlier on. You're decisive, you act quick, but you stay with it. You stick with that decision. So once you find the path, you feel like this is my path, that you charge through it.
Yeah.
Right. So early on, you knew. And in hindsight, finishing your college degree, that was quite important.
Yeah.
Because talk more of like where you are now, right? So without that college degree, running off to a teacher training, God knows what path that would have charted.
Very different.
So you have your father to thank.
Yes.
Now, I know your father, I've met him many times. He loves to practice Iyengar yoga.
He does, yeah.
Iyengar yoga. And he's been doing that for decades. And was that how you were introduced to yoga at a young age?
No, actually, it was quite the opposite. My parents, my family, a lot of scientists, a lot of medical doctors. Eastern philosophy, Eastern science was not something that I was brought up with. So when I told them that I was going to do yoga, they were a little bit concerned. I remember around the same age, at age 19, I decided that I wanted to learn meditation. So I went to the mountains in the south of France with the Zen Buddhist, when they have the big stick and all of that. And my dad was so concerned, he actually called one of the entity in France to control cults to make sure that I was not going to enroll in one of the cults. So there was a lot of suspicion from my parents, but at the same time, very quickly they saw how happy this yoga made me feel. And then when I came back from teacher training, my dad took one of my first class, my mom too, and then they never stopped. And then the Bikram studio in the south of France closed right before the pandemic, so he started doing Iyengar.
Amazing. Mm-hmm. But now, you did your first yoga class was when you were 15.
Yes.
Right?
I had very much ulterior motives. So at that time I was doing ballet. I was very hyperactive, so I needed something physically to get to channel my energy. But then there was a cute guy in high school, and his mom was doing Iyengar classes. So I knew that if I enrolled in the class, I would get to take the bus with him. So that's why I stayed with the yoga. But it kind of planted the seed in my brain, in my mind, that yoga was something maybe to explore too at a later time. Mm-hmm. And put yoga in the map for me.
Wow. So you have a cute high school boy to thank for setting you off on your yoga journey.
That's right.
That's cool. Whatever it takes. It takes. Most of the time it's family, friends, wanting to impress somebody that will draw you to your first yoga class. Yeah. And whatever it is, it is. Mm-hmm. And what's nice about the original Hot Yoga series is that it's a beginning style of practice. More than anybody is welcome to come and experience that. All right, so let's move on to yoga teaching. Mm-hmm. Yoga teaching. What made you go to Los Angeles for Bikram yoga teacher training in 2012? That, I'd say, is a really brave move, going from France to the U.S., and you were only 23 years old. Mm-hmm.
Yeah, at that time, it didn't seem like I had a choice. Bikram was in LA. I wanted to become a Bikram instructor and dedicated my life to the Bikram series. So I just went. I really didn't think twice about the decision. I had never traveled outside of Europe before, but I just took a plane, landed in LA, and then so it was in 2012. The training were very, very large, about 600 people.
Wow.
Yes, it was a big training. And the first day when we had orientation, I met someone who became my husband for many years. So I also had a love at first sight on first few days that I arrived in America. So that was a big change.
Big change.
Yes.
And then you finish the 9 weeks. Mm-hmm. You go back to Paris.
Yeah, I had to go back because I'd only had a tourist visa. So I went back to Paris. I was teaching there for about a year and a half while I was working on my visa. And then I came in February of 2014. That's when I came here permanently.
Wow. Mm-hmm. And when you applied for a visa, was that challenging? I mean, what did they say? You said, I'm going to come here and teach yoga? Or what?
Well,
what was that like?
It was not very challenging. It was a fiancé visa, so it was to be with my future husband.
That makes sense.
But I do remember having that sense of pride. I had to go to the American embassy in Paris a lot, and I would pass the picture of Obama, and I was so proud I was going to come to Obama's country.
Wow, that's awesome. Well, what was it like teaching? You know, you said in early days, the Bikram yoga system, teachers would crack the whip, right? And it was, don't drink water, don't leave the room, all of that.
Yeah.
Things have changed since then. But back then, that was the way it was. Mm-hmm. But most important, though, it was a simple and effective sequence of beginning Hatha yoga.
Yeah.
Something that anybody can do. I've heard so many people in the 20 plus years that we've been running these studios here in Austin, I've heard so many people say, this is a life-changing practice. Some will even say a life-saving practice.
Yeah,
right?
I agree.
Yeah. So you probably in France, in Paris, was probably a very hardcore yoga teacher.
Yeah, I think at that time everybody was, and especially in Paris, a lot of dancer and athlete will come to the studio. So everybody was already very highly disciplined and had very high expectations for themselves. So teaching in Paris was very hardcore, very disciplined. There was just the thought of leaving the room did not exist. It was not even something that we'll think about. So when I came to the States and I started teaching in California, people were leaving the room right and left, drinking water, pouring the hydro flask, leaving the room, take a shower, coming back, and I felt like something is off. What I learned from my teachers in Paris and from Bikram did not really match what I was saying, so it took a little bit to adjust. Now I understand the value of being a little bit more lenient toward the students and not expect that everybody has the same background and the same ability to stay in the room for that long. But it was a little bit of a shock.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. And while I personally like a bit of that tougher approach, I don't mind that at all. I'd say from a studio owner's perspective that you have to tweak. We had to tweak.
Yeah.
Definitely tweak out a lot of that rigidity and strictness if you ever wanted some students to come back again.
Right.
Because this is not a yoga practice that is only deserved by a small few who can take that type of discipline. There's a big word there, discipline. Why should it only be for them? I think over time, as they widen the net for more yoga students, more beginning yoga students, we need to allow them that space to find that discipline on their own, especially in today's world.
Yeah, absolutely. As you mentioned, my parents come to visit me quite often, and they are now in their 70s, and they always feel very comfortable coming back to Pure because we have older students that come every day, and they felt like they were never judged for being older, for having some limitations, and for not being like the typical 25-year-old fit ballet dancer.
That's right. My mom, she's 86 years old. She practices 3 times a week.
Yeah.
She won't do the 90-minute class because she says it's too hot and too long. She'll do the 60-minute class 3 times a week. And I think that's wonderful.
Yeah.
I think it's a wonderful accommodation, wonderful adaptation for people like my mom. She's living a much better, happier life because she can do this 3 times a week.
Yeah.
So for that, I appreciate.
Yeah. We had to adapt at some point.
For sure.
Yeah.
So what was it like being a full-time yoga teacher, especially while these aspects were missing, like when you're in California? Tell us about that grind.
Yeah. So it was a different mindset than teaching for Parisian students, but at the same time, I was living a pretty typical full-time Bikram teacher. I was doing advanced every week with Troy and Aiko in California, and I was practicing every day at least. So I would say I was pretty standard Bikram teacher in those years.
12 classes a week?
Yes, 12 classes a week, definitely. At least. Sometimes I will do triples. But after a year or so, I felt that I wanted something bigger, and I knew that I still wanted to help people, but I felt like maybe I can do something more than that. So that's when I decided to go back to school and do my prereqs for nursing, because nursing seemed like it was a career that will fit my desire to help people.
Yeah, and that's why it was good that you finished your degree.
Absolutely.
Right? And so how did your French literature degree help you in nursing?
Yeah, well, it helped in the sense that I already had a master's degree, so I was able to do a nursing program at a graduate level.
Oh, that's great.
Yeah.
Right. So then you find Pure Yoga Texas, right? That is, Marty and I, we've been practicing and teaching and operating these original hot yoga studios for over 25 years now, right? 20 years for the studios, practicing more than 25. And here we are, 25 years later, right? 25 years older. And we have seen so many yoga teachers come and go, We've seen them start their path, get off the path, return to the path, and but also at the same time weave their own path, their own unique yoga story, maybe starting with the original hot yoga and moving on to other systems and in other careers, but also maintaining a practice and teaching. And I think if you can maintain your practice and maintain teaching for more than 10 years, I think you have something else to add, something else to contribute.
Yeah.
Right? Everyone grows and evolves, but there's also these constants. If you can keep it constant for 10 years more, then it's with you. That practice stays with you. So tell us how you found us. Tell us how you found Pure.
Yeah. Well, in 2019, I got divorced. So that was a very big shock. And I didn't want to stay in California. So I knew that I had to go somewhere else. And I was going to apply to nursing school, but for me, finding a yoga studio was way more important than nursing school. So I knew about I knew about you and Mardi, and I knew that the studio was Pure and that you guys did the Bikram series, and so I came here 4 days, and I knew it had to work. I didn't have that many other options, so I came here. I took your class, and I felt at home in Austin. So I decided to move here permanently after my divorce, and then starting nursing school in 2019.
Yeah, everything just seems to fall perfectly in place for you.
Well, sometimes.
That's great. That's great. All right. So the theme in the theme in your life seems that you're decisive, you're certain, but you have that strength of character, strength of mind to stay the course, to stay the path, right? And that's wonderful. That's what I love about you. Always you have that stick-to-itiveness, the determination, the focus, the concentration, all those mental aspects of this yoga, this hot yoga that we cultivate in the mind.
Yeah.
You're living that, right? So cool. You make the decision to move to Austin, right? You come here, and I know from what I can gather in the conversations we had early that you were pretty hardcore. You really were like a champion of that 90-minute class, which I love too. And at that time that you came, we had already started adding some of these 60-minute classes. Yeah. We weren't quite so quote-unquote pure, right, at some point. And I was a little nervous, to be honest with you. I was like, not sure, how's she going to like this? Is she going to really get this? And what we're doing? So I was admittedly insecure about that, but now I'm so happy to see and call you and recognize you as our highest purist. We like to call us purists, and so you are 100% purist. Thank you. That's
a compliment.
All right.
Yeah, I never felt like I was fitting in any studio in California. So when I came to Pure, I felt at home pretty quickly. Because it's true that you guys had evolved away from just offering 90 minutes and that's it. Because you had to. It was a very smart business decision. It's Darwinism. I mean, you either die or you evolve. Yeah. So I'm glad you did, because I've seen so many studios, they're so rigid, they had to close the door because nobody will come. So I always knew that you did the right thing, although I might have liked things differently, but I knew it is what it is. So I was also seeing teachers like Nora P, Nora Rex, Audra, Cece, very hardcore Bikram teachers, but they will do something else. Yeah. So when I moved here, I think I had done IHP 3 times in my life. And at that time, it was a good exercise, but I didn't really love it. But then I was seeing those teachers being so passionate about it, and I will take their Bikram class. That was great. Dialogue, heat, everything was perfect. So it made me think there's maybe something to it. So I kept doing the IHP, and I loved it, and it improved my Bikram practice tremendously, especially my core. And I think it made me a stronger yoga practitioner.
Yeah, the Inferno Hot Pilates, or IHP, is definitely a system that really latched on to the hot yoga system, because we had a hot room, and we had sometimes empty rooms, and you needed to put people into those empty rooms and offer them something a little different. As we said, the hot yoga class is a great foundation for most people. They can come in, and it's a Bikram, it's a beginning yoga class that everybody can start with. But at some point, it's important to build strength, VO2 max, cardiovascular output. You need all of those things to maintain a much more healthy body. And I think Inferno Hot Pilates was a good plug in, and it fit perfectly into the yoga studio. So kudos to Gabby Walters for developing that and really partnering with hot yoga studios to deliver it.
Yeah,
so
that was
good
very
for
smart. Yeah, it was. And also it was around that time I was turning 30, and I was reading a lot of scientific literature about losing bone density when you start hitting your 30s. And I knew that if I was going to do IHP, more resistance training, that I will not lose bone density.
Yeah, that's great. So let's move on. Then you come in, you move here in 2019, and everything is great. We're rolling off to the races. Then 2020, all of a sudden, the pandemic, hits us right between the eyes. So tell us what changed for you.
Yeah. So I was starting nursing school, and I was starting my rotation. So I saw firsthand the pandemic and people dying in the ICUs. And that was very difficult to see, but also reinforced my desire to become a nurse. I knew that I had found my way, and I was going to become a nurse. But also I learned a lot from you and Mardi, because literally overnight, like it's not even exaggeration, overnight we had a virtual platform that you guys developed. And I learned a lot about resilience. I think you guys say something, don't waste a good challenge.
Yeah. Or trigger. Yeah.
Yes.
Yeah. Challenge or trigger.
Yes. And I found that it was, I learned a lot from both of you about not giving up. Because many studios like, oh, what can we do? It's closed. And then that's what they did in some studio in the south of France, and then never reopened. But you guys really fought for what you wanted, and we kept the practice alive. And it was the students were very grateful for what we did.
Yeah, we did the best with what we had, and we also had leases to pay.
Right.
And landlord's not willing to forgive anything.
Yeah.
And so we knew, okay, we just got to keep going. We can blame others, but instead we can look at ourselves and say, what can we do now?
Yeah.
Right. It's the times of difficulty, the times of challenge, where you're actually living your yoga off the mat.
Absolutely.
Right? The determination, the stick-to-itiveness, and without teachers like you and many others in the Pure family who stood by that, and stood by us, we would not have survived. And so we did it. We did it together.
We did it.
Right?
Yeah.
That's great. And so it seems that at this point, especially, I can imagine that seeing this pandemic firsthand right there, that should have had that had a massive impact and really reinforced your desire to go into nursing, and also mental health. So mental health is a recurring thread throughout your life story here.
It is.
So share.
Yeah, well, I feel like I was born in it. My dad is a psychiatrist. My mom is a psychologist. So I had no choice, basically. But also myself, I have been struggling with depression ever since I was a child. So it's been something that's been constant in my life. And then after the divorce, I was so depressed that I had to be put on lots of psych medication to the point of reaching some type of emotional numbing. So I was not really in touch with my emotion. But I had one rotation at Shoal Creek, which is the psych hospital not very far away from here. And I saw other people suffering. And I saw there was not that much difference between me and them, between people who have mood disorder, depression, anxiety, bipolar, schizophrenia, eating disorders. And I found that might be my way in nursing, through nursing, to help them.
You could see some of that in you, and you can relate. Yeah. Right? You can totally relate to them and just kind of more fuel to your passion.
Yes.
Right? That's wonderful.
Yeah. So I graduated from nursing school, so I became a registered nurse, and then so I was working in the ICU, and I was finishing my nurse practitioner program, which is a step above registered nurse. And ever since, I've been working in a psych hospital in Georgetown. So I'm still very much in the field with those people, trying to help them.
Yeah, that's great. That's wonderful. I know that it's easy, I think, for people to knock our healthcare system. Very, very easy. Yeah. But I know that just in recent events, with Marty and myself, both of us, having some different issues and injuries, that it's world class what our healthcare system can do, what the people in the healthcare system can do. Every system has its flaws.
True.
There's always ways that you can improve it. Many, many ways I'm sure you can improve it. But the people in there are givers, they're life savers, they're life changers, and kudos to all of the healthcare workers out there. They're really what people they pulled us out of the wreckage.
Yes.
Pretty much.
Yeah.
Right? So that goes to the conversation about medicine 2.0.
Mm-hmm.
Medicine 3.0, as Peter Attia would talk
Yes.
about, longevity, health span, all of those topics that are really blowing up the internet, blowing up the bookstores, blowing up Amazon. So tell us firsthand your experiences as a nurse, seeing the healthcare field, seeing medicine 2.0 and 3.0, and tell us more.
Yeah, so right now we are still very much practicing medicine 2.0. A lot of the patients that will actually die from the COVID-19 infection had comorbid conditions. They had obesity or the metabolic syndrome. They had diabetes, which is a big one. They had cardiovascular disease. So I felt that we could have prevented so many deaths if we had addressed their diet, exercise, lifestyle modification. But also I saw that there was a lot of disparity. People who were dying in the ICU were not the wealthiest of the patients. So that was a big reminder that there was a lot of work to do in terms of prevention, and instead of the medicine 2.0 is the disease-based model. So you come to the provider, you have an issue, and then you get prescribed something to treat what's going on acutely now. Medicine 3.0, it's more about prevention. So how do we avoid those things from occurring in the first place? So I agree that that's where the focus should be, but unfortunately this is not what I practice, especially right now. I see people in psych hospital when they already had a psychotic break or manic episode. So they need medication, they need acute stabilization. But then from there, it's my role to see how I can help them so it doesn't reoccur, so it doesn't happen again.
Yeah. This brings us to Peter Attia's idea of medicine 3.0. Today, there's so much information with respect to longevity and health span. David Sinclair, Andrew Huberman, and Peter Attia have really sparked a revolution in thinking about health care and prevention, longevity and health span, big buzzwords. I think you have a unique vantage point coming out of nursing school at this time while all of this volume of information is hitting us. If you were going to nursing school 20 years ago, you wouldn't have learned of any of this. But today you are. So with your current education today and all of these other, all this other information coming at you, how does that shape or influence your thinking?
Yeah, it seems like it's great to focus on physical health and longevity, but all of that is for nothing if emotionally or mentally you are miserable. And Peter Attia, in the last part of his book about emotional health, talks about the rate of suicide, alcoholism, all those mental health disorders that it doesn't matter if you feel great physically. If in your mind you're not well, then it doesn't matter if you live 20 years more than that. And it seems like lately the patients that I see in the hospital that have delusion, that have schizophrenia, or that have visual or auditory hallucinations, some of the themes of our culture, such as AI, I see a lot of patients that tell me that AI, someone is talking to them through AI, that they are modifying their voice using AI software. Elon Musk comes back pretty often in their delusion. Some manic patient will think that they just got a phone call from Elon Musk that asked them to participate in the new discovery.
Wow.
So it seems like what's happening right now in our world with the overload of information can also influence or can shape our patients' delusion, grandiosity, or hallucinations.
Wow.
Yeah.
There is so much stimulation happening to the brain nowadays with AI, technology, podcasts, too many to speak of, that 100 years ago our brains were consumed with, chopping wood, building homes, starting fires, and there was a lot less that our brains had to work through other than survival.
Yeah.
Eating the next meal, surviving for the next meal, right? Protecting ourselves from danger. Now our brain feels like it's in overload.
Yeah, and we can see that with the rise of ADHD, attention deficit hyperactivity disorder. So one of the hypotheses is that back in the days, we used to have one person in the group when we are hunter-gatherer that will not sleep at night to just check for prey. So that person had to always look around, and it was a quality to be distractible because it was promoting safety. But nowadays, those people that are descendants of the people who were watching for threat have difficulty focusing in a world where everything is designed to catch your attention and to distract you. And that's something that a lot of our patients struggle with. Wow,
that's a novel theory, right? I guess that's evidence-based.
Yeah, I have heard it from a psychiatrist.
Is that right?
Yes.
Wow. Okay, so Peter, too, you're mentioning his last couple of chapters, and he talks about what's that idea? The eulogy virtues?
Yeah, so it's actually from a book. It's called The Road to Character. And in this book, the author talks about having the resume virtues, which is MD from Stanford, thriving medical practice, things that look good on the resume. And he had tons of those, but he says that the eulogy virtues, such as being a kind father, being a good husband, being a good friend, being compassionate human being, just a good human being, he say that he had very little of those because of some of his past trauma, sexual and physical trauma when he was 5 and 7, made him develop that personality of being extremely perfectionist, very hardworking. He described his work ethic as an addiction that is highly socially accepted. It's actually promoted. Oh, you're such a great worker. You have such a great work ethic. But for him, it was a way to escape dealing with his problems. And he's it's my favorite chapter of the book. He's very vulnerable. He talks about when twice he had to go in a psych facility to do a lot of therapy. He mentioned a little bit that he used, I think, psilocybin, maybe MDMA. I don't exactly recall, but it was mostly talk therapy to process the trauma. And he very much insists on the fact that there is no outliving, which is the whole theme, without emotional health, which for him it's a broader term than mental health. Because when you think about mental health, for people like me, we think DSM-5, which is the diagnostic statistical manual where we have all the disease, depression, anxiety, schizophrenia, all of them are very much classified. But for him, mental health, you can look like you are very functional, you are a successful person, but inside you have anger outbursts, or you are not a good father or a good husband. So those things that don't appear like very problematic when you just look at the surface have deep root and should be addressed. And that's where Medicine 3.0 comes in play, is that we need to find a way to see those patterns very early on. And now it kind of hit home when I'm going to be raising another human being, And I know that you can't prevent anything, and it's not desirable to prevent our children to experience adversity, because that's what builds you, like we are talking about the callous mind. But at the same time, if there is a trauma, to address it right at the root, to prevent the person to build themselves upon some foundation that are not solid and can linger for a long time.
Mm-hmm. Well said. I also believe that a yoga community is a great supporter of emotional health.
Oh yeah, absolutely.
Hot yoga is great, I believe, strongly believe, and I know you do, for mental health and for many major mood disorders.
Yes.
I think hot yoga has certain scientific or biochemical triggers, pathways that it helps promote and alleviate many of those symptoms. But as you said, mental health, but also emotional health. And emotional health is, we are human beings, need to be with other human beings. And that sense of community was very much, could have been lost, was lost by a lot of people during the pandemic. So post-pandemic, I think there's a search, research for that community again. And this is where yoga studios can be more than just like a place to find a physical practice. There's so much more than that.
Yeah, that's very true. And when I used to learn about how to conduct a psychiatric interview, the social part and the family part, I used to think, oh, it's boring, and tell me about your father, or tell me about your mother, did you have to move a lot as a child? And then when I start talking to patients, I see how much impact it has on their life. So now it's actually one of my favorite part of the interview, to know what type of emotional regulation they have, and how they interact with others. And a lot of it is based in early childhood, between 0 and 3.
That makes sense. And also beyond that too, in other formative years, adolescent years, there have been studies done. This is by Dr. Charles Raison, also a psychiatrist specializing in mood disorder. He said, you look at the family environment, and the child is depressed, so is the parent. Treat the parent, and the child's depression goes away. So it is definitely the family environment, the family unit that also is very important.
Yeah, it's dynamic.
So, all right, tell us about brain energy. I want to move on to brain energy, psychedelics. We mentioned ketamine, cannabis. All right, so some big buzzwords there. So let's start with brain energy.
Okay, so brain energy, it's a book that was released about a little bit more than a year ago by Christopher Palmer, who is a psychiatrist trained at Harvard. And it started by, just for him, he was a little bit overweight, so he started the keto diet, just reducing carbs. And he saw great change in his body, he decreased blood pressure, losing weight. But at the same time, he saw that his depression too was just gone. And it's one thing to do it when we talk about mental disorder like depression, anxiety, but then there is this big term of serious mental illness, such as bipolar disorder or schizophrenia. So those people have very serious mental health condition. And he was actually able to treat people, get rid of auditory or visual hallucinations through the ketogenic diet, which is at first was just case by case, but then he has this theory that all mental health disorders come from dysfunction at the mitochondria level. So from high school biology, we know that the cell has the mitochondria, which is the powerhouse that produces ATP, which is the energy currency of the cell. And through the ketogenic diet, which is not a new diet, it's something that was actually invented in the 1920s to help patients that had epilepsy, because they found that it mimicked a fasting state. So instead of the neurons to be filled with glucose, it will be filled by the ketones. And by mimicking that fasting state, it decreases the excitability of the cell, which creates seizure. Then in the 50s, all the not mood stabilizer, but the anticonvulsant came, so they kind of moved away from the keto diet, but about 30% of the patient would not respond to those medications. So they reintroduced the keto diet in the 70s. And what most people don't know is that in psychiatry, to treat mania, to treat bipolar disorder in the manic phase, we use FDA, non-FDA approved medication. So we use anticonvulsant medication to treat epilepsy, but we treat them to help with mania. So this is not really far-fetched to use also an approach which is the keto diet to help with patients that have mental health disorders, since it was used already in the past to help with seizure and epilepsy.
Wow, I didn't realize that. So the ketogenic diet obviously creates the ketosis, right, in the body, and it simulates fasting.
Right.
Many people are into intermittent fasting.
Yes.
Right. That kind of creates that state as well. Mm-hmm. So that is something they feel that rather than feeding the brain with just constant doses of glucose, like we can and are able to today in today's industrialized world, that was maybe throwing off the brain chemistry. Mm-hmm. And we're seeing more of a prevalence of these types of disorders.
Yes. Yeah. And the keto diet is not a first-line treatment these days, but and in my environment, that I can't tell patients to use the keto diet, but I think that's one of the alternative way of treating a patient. It's very promising. Interesting.
I think the theme there is that there's so many ways that people can treat their diet, and there's so many fads, there's so many movements, but what you're pointing out is that there was actually a particular diet, ketogenic diet, which was good for certain things, certain types of treatments. And we can imagine then that what it is that you intake is going to obviously
affect your brain. Yes,
right?
Absolutely.
That's your brain energy.
Yeah, and one limitation of psychiatry that is also very frustrating for us is that the psych meds that we have, a lot of them don't work. When you open a psychopharmacology book, the first thing about any medication is like the exact mechanism of action is unknown. So we don't even know how it really works. We just through them and then see if the patient is going to have a response. But with the keto diet is that the side effects are basically none. Yeah. I mean, you can have the keto flu, but it only lasts a few days. So it's something that I think has a lot of future.
Wow. I like that. Mm-hmm. Then talk about the future. There's everybody's talking about psychedelics.
Yes.
Let's start there with psychedelics.
Yeah, it's a very hot topic, and I'm in no way an expert in the matter. So I'm just going to share a little bit of what I know. We need to have a understanding. It's a general term, but it doesn't refer to the same thing. So we have the psychedelic per se, which act on the serotonin neurotransmitter. So that's the psilocybin, or LSD, the acid, or DMP. Then we have ketamine, which is it's called a dissociative anesthetic. So it's used at large dose. Is used for horse. It's used mostly in veterinary medicine for anesthesia, and it's also used for human. So they produce different response because they don't act on the same receptor. And then we also have the MDMA, which is the Molly ecstasy, which act on also a different receptor in the brain. So I think with the psychedelic is that there is a huge diversity in response in people, and it has to be done in a very much controlled environment with a trained professional, because on the back end, what I see is that when things have gone wrong, especially if some patients have some predisposition to psychosis or to mania, giving them a psychoactive substance, especially if the dose is not very controlled, can flip them into acute mania, acute psychosis, which can send them best case scenario in the psych hospital, but also it can be lethal if it's done unsupervised. So I will advise people to be extremely careful with what they do, and with whom they do it, because the impact is not negligible. But I have seen some good results, especially with trauma work. So helping patients processing their trauma, reprocessing their memories. So I think it has, again, we need way more research than what we have right now. But I think that those substances, they produce a physical sensation, and also changing in perception, color, sound, smell, that can alter the way that the brain, alter the circuitry of the brain, and can produce real therapeutic responses.
Yeah, is it Michael Pollan who wrote that book
Yes.
about psychedelics?
Yeah.
That sounds like there's so much promising information, and they are natural substance. A lot of the mushrooms, right, are natural, but I think people need to be very cautious. I think there's a lot of parties that happen, and it's potentially could be dangerous. I've heard some good stories. I've heard some not so good stories.
Yeah.
So I think we all need to approach it with a high degree of caution.
Absolutely. And also, if you do mushrooms in a party, there is some social pressure to not be the one that has the bad trip. Yeah. So if you start having some sadness and reprocessing about your parents or your trauma, that can be a not therapeutic environment.
Yeah.
And same thing with cannabis. Now, especially with spice and synthetic cannabis, I see every week, basically, I see patients that end up in the psych hospital because they flipped into psychosis due to ingesting those substances. So be careful.
Really? So is that a certain dose because they've overdone it? Or is it, like you say, some people have a predisposition to psychotic episodes?
Yeah, I think it's both.
It's both.
And it's hard to know how much they have done. Some patients, sometimes they don't remember, sometimes they are not really truthful about how much they have ingested. But yeah, I think it's a combination of both.
Okay.
Oh, and also what I wanted to add about ketamine is that Matthew Perry, who left us way too soon, so he's not shy about his struggle with addiction, depression, anxiety, and he was doing legally with professional ketamine infusions, I think once a week, and he ended up dying from, that's what the coroner says, that he ended up dying from the consequences of the ketamine that can create respiratory depression and cardiac overload.
Wow.
Overstimulation, yeah.
Wow. And so as in your field, as a psychiatric nurse, things like that are not available to you.
Well, not in the psych hospital, but when I was working in private practice, yes.
Yes.
But it's highly regulated. Not mushroom, but ketamine. Yes, you can do it.
Okay.
Yeah.
Okay. All right. Well, let's move on. Let's talk about some fun things. Yoga teaching. Let's talk about that. How have you evolved as a yoga teacher?
Well, I still say the dialogue, and I still keep it pretty close to what Bikram taught us, but I have way more compassion towards my students. I used to feel a deep sense of anger when people will leave the room. I no longer feel that. I see it more like, what could you have done better to help them stay? So it's not like, oh, they are just lazy and they don't want to stay in the room, they can't take it. It's what could you have done? So more compassion towards my students. And also I know how hard it is to just show up in a yoga class. It takes a lot. There are so many obstacles, as you say, even just finding parking or finding traffic. So I know that when they show up at the door, it's already a huge effort. And I recognize that way more than I did in the past. So, yeah.
And I think when you see something in somebody else, if you feel anger when somebody is leaving the room, a great lesson is, what is that telling you about yourself? What is that reflecting back on you? And so in your experience, what's the difference between a good teacher and a great one?
I feel like a great teacher knows their limitation, they know where they are, and they know there's so much more to learn. So someone who just think that that are humble, that keep practicing, and that they stay hungry for learning more and keep evolving themselves.
You certainly have, right?
Thank
You keep learning. You never stop. What advice would you give? We just did that. What subjects around yoga are your favorite to teach at the Pure Yoga Institute, our yoga teacher training?
Yeah, it's one of my favorite part of the year to do the training. I've been teaching the benefits of the mental health benefits of being in the heat, so not necessarily being in the hot room, but also sauna or deliberate heat exposure. But also we talk about how the practice of yoga, the physical asana, can help with depression, anxiety, all the mood disorder, eating disorder, substance use disorder, and then even the most serious mental health illness like schizophrenia or bipolar disorder. So that's my favorite topic.
Yeah. You're serving the yoga community well.
Thank you.
Right? So much has changed in the last few years for you.
Yeah.
Right? Nurse practitioner, UT professor now, or professor at the UT Austin. You're a homeowner.
Yes.
Right? Married, pregnant.
Yes.
And also an ethical vegan. Right? So you've been doing that for a long time, right?
Yes.
Veganism.
Yeah, veganism is a big part of my life. I became vegan around the same time I actually moved to LA. So much easier to be vegan in the States than in France, where cheese is like a national pride. Yes. So for me, veganism is a way of life, of living with compassion and respecting animal rights. I truly feel like humans should not abuse animals the way they do, and right now we have so much alternative and different ways of eating that I feel it's not necessary to have all this industrial farming, which is terrible for the environment. So I'm vegan for the animals first, then for the environment, and also it's good for your health. My cholesterol is pretty low, and all of that. As my pregnancy, as I discovered I was pregnant, I actually asked my OB if it was okay to remain vegan throughout the pregnancy, and she said that as long as I supplement with B12, as you should always do as a vegan, and iron, that there should not be any problem. The first trimester was very difficult. It's very common for women to have food aversion, so things that they love eating, they just can't even stand the view of it. So I had that a lot. Wow. And being vegan, I'm already pretty limited in what I can eat. So having, I could not stand the view of tofu. So my husband was like, "What can I cook if you can't eat anything?" So it's been difficult, but it went away after the second trimester. Oh. Yes, completely. It is so weird what the body does.
Yeah. So then, as your body has changed, right, through first pregnancy.
Yeah.
Tell us about how that informed your yoga practice and your yoga teaching.
Yes. Huge shift. Probably the biggest shift that a woman's body can go through since puberty. I mean, everything, all the hormones, everything changes. In the first trimester, I did not come to the studio at all. I was feeling very sick and I was lethargic. I would just go to work and just rest on the couch for the rest of the day. So I was feeling so tired. Which was also very difficult for me to not tell myself, "Oh, you're just lazy and get your butt out of the couch, go to the hot room." But I actually contacted Afton Caraway, she was very helpful, and she told me, don't feel like you have to go to yoga because that's just what you do. And also she told me, don't change your non-pregnancy practice because it's not the same body. So that was very helpful to have a very different mindset on how I will just step on the mat. And it's also difficult to just let nature take his right. And when you become pregnant, the rectus abdomini just spread to allow for the uterus to grow. So you have no core muscle, which is very difficult to do, like all the yoga and all the HP without any core.
Yeah.
But I feel like the yoga has been helping me a lot to have a healthy pregnancy.
That's great. Not a lot of, but back in the old days, it was seldom you had a child and you were practicing yoga, hot yoga nonetheless. You were practicing up until the day you delivered.
Yeah.
And those stories were like fewer and farther between. Now it's commonplace.
Yes, it is.
Much more so, and it's strongly advised that you don't all of a sudden start a hot yoga practice. If you have a well-developed practice, then it is something or your body knows.
Yeah.
Just like your veganism. Like you don't turn to be a vegan
the day you become pregnant. Yes.
Obviously.
And I did check with my OB as well to make sure it was safe.
Yeah.
So because I had an uncomplicated pregnancy with no risk, she told me that as long as my core temperature didn't go above 100 Fahrenheit, then it was safe. So what I did when I came back to the studio for the first few weeks during Savasana, I will leave the room and I will check my temp already to make sure, and it was never above 100. So it felt very safe.
Perfect.
Yeah.
So I think most importantly, I've seen you happier now than I've ever seen you before, and I think that's a wonderful thing. So tell us what's new and what's changed. What's the different perspective?
Yeah. Well, it's when your life has a meaning and when you do what you love for work and you feel like your work matters, I feel like that's a huge piece of happiness. Knowing that what you do has an impact in the world, give you a deep sense of satisfaction. So my work is very satisfying, and I recently got married too, so I found that I was ready to being in a relationship again, which gives me a lot of joy, with my husband Tyler and our dog Bobby and our future daughter Eloise. So I feel like things came where they were supposed to be.
Yay, that's awesome. And what I say again is I see that thread of hot yoga, original hot yoga, Bikram yoga. I see that threading throughout your whole life and keeping you on that path to find your purpose. And that gave you the strength, the courage, the ammunition to stay on that path.
Yeah, it did.
And that's a great story.
Yeah. Thank you.
Thank you, Lea.
Yes.
Yay. Awesome job. Thank you, everybody.
Thank you.
Pure Yoga Talks. Keep checking in on this channel, Pure Yoga TV, and you'll find more of these interviews. Where are they now? We've got Afton. We've got others coming up. So keep checking in. Stay tuned. Like, subscribe, all those wonderful things.
Ring the bell.
Ring the bell and comment down below. And we'll see you on the next one. Stay tuned.
Bye.
Bye.